Welcome to our show, Women Plus We've Been Waiting For, where we have been having conversations around women, wealth, power, and social change. And our objective really has been to unpack what has not been working in philanthropy and impact investing, and really explore opportunities we have today to do better and to have an even greater impact. We have an amazing, or I should say, awesome guest with us today, Susan McPherson. Welcome.
Oh, Elise, I am so excited to be here, and congratulations on the launch of your new firm. I am one of your biggest fans, so count me in for always to be supportive.
Thank you so much. And I should say, Susan, as I introduce you, you have been a big inspiration for Lebec Consulting and our work. You are an incredible global corporate social responsibility expert that has just really done phenomenal work at the intersection of brands and social change. And, as the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, your companies, I feel like you have just unlocked your superpowers as a serial connector, an angel investor, and really someone who has been such an important voice and doer in this world of corporate social responsibility and social change. So we're super excited to have you here today. I love your new book, The Lost Art of Connecting, which I will show you has already some highlighted passages and notes that I've been taking, and we'll dive into it a little bit later today. But I just thank you for making time for us.
I wouldn't have missed this for the world, honestly.
Fantastic. So we have 20 minutes, and we really wanted to just get to the crux of the issues and really have the chance to hear your insights. So from your perspective, Susan, with the work that you have done, what are 3 ways in which philanthropy could significantly improve its impact? How could we do better?
Well, I think we are in a world that really is longing for systemic change. And I may have 4 instead of 3, if that's okay. But I'll be efficient. Number 1, who is already out there doing the work? Identify, if you're a philanthropist, if you're a funder, identify the organizations and individuals that are already working to solve that particular problem and help them join forces. In other words, be a uniter, be a connector. Focus should be more on solving problems through creative collaboration and less on the establishment and creation of new institutions. Because there's plenty of good that's already happening, but may not be aware of the other good, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Communications, and I'm not just saying that because I run an impact communications firm, but communications has never been more important for the impact sector and for philanthropists and foundations. Understanding effective communication is the lifeblood of any systems change campaign. And that includes maintaining transparency and compelling communications, both internally within your organization, within whatever organization you are funding, and of course, externally to the public audiences that you are trying to reach. I would also go one step further and say, tap into all the new technology, which I know can be a lot to absorb because every day there's a new platform or a new product to explore, but you need someone on your team being kind of the early adopter.
Mm-hmm.
Third would be pay attention to policy and government. If we seek to change complex systems, we also need to be working to change laws. And I point to my dear friends who founded a company called Apolitical, which is all about helping government be better. But philanthropists need to help push for laws that are amenable to the populations that they are serving and supporting. And last but not least, measure and evaluate. We all know what doesn't get measured, right? But the most successful system change campaigns create an ongoing data capture, and then they're able to pivot if they're noticing trends that aren't going in the right direction. And if you're not rigorously measuring, you're not able to do that.
Right.
Those are my 4. There's probably 1,000 more, but
I know it's so hard. It's so hard, but those are great. And I want to go back to 2 things that you shared. So we've been hearing a lot on the show about the importance of collaboration. We've heard radical collaboration. I love the term that you use as well, which is creative collaboration. And, frankly, this is something that I was seeing a lot in the early days when I had just joined WADA.org. And, whenever I had the chance to speak with business students where everybody was just so excited to launch their own startup, what I would always say was, before you take that path, is there an opportunity where you could apply all those skill sets and goals within an existing organizations? There could be a social entrepreneur, a nonprofit leader that's been chipping away at this issue very creatively, where there's room for you to lead within that organization versus create all of these new nonprofits, because we are navigating, a universe that is saturated with too many nonprofits.
And intricately, I can never say that word, connected. And let's tap into that connection. No, I fervently believe everything you're saying.
Yeah, it's so important because, then on the flip side, right, the conversations that we're trying to have with philanthropists is one that is anchored around big philanthropy. Can we get to a place, just knowing the level of wealth that is out there that's been generated, particularly in the past year at during the pandemic, can we get to a place where, we are starting to see 20, 50 to $100 million unrestricted gifts going to organizations ready to scale? I mean, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, those amounts would have been, they would have seemed just so high and impossible. But when we think about scale and opportunities in the context of today, how can we still be just talking about $1 million grant? That's just not going to move the needle. Now, the other side of that conversation is, yes, but we would like to see more collaboration between existing nonprofits because, we'd love to fund an ecosystem of approaches that reinforce each other. So it's just really interesting to get your feedback, Susan, that, creative collaboration is important. Completely agree on the policy piece. I could probably have an entire conversation with you about that, particularly as those policies also influence the amount of funding that is stuck in donor advised funds, or what is happening right now in terms of the conversation with foundation and endowments. But I want to bring it back to you. So, thinking about these different themes, when you look at the industry overall, is there maybe one big shift that you feel would just really trigger so many of these changes?
Well, I think we're seeing that. When I think about the fact that pushing for racial equity was here and environmentalism was here, and we are seeing that now, and to coin the term you just used, radically combined, right? You don't have one without the other. Mm-hmm. So funding should be to both, right? We can't like look at both these issues in a separate lens. So what I see is that is happening. Everything, of course, this week in the news and last week was on Afghanistan, and next week it will be on the refugee crisis. Well, we have to understand that there are 88 million people on this planet who are displaced, but we have to look at the root cause, right? We can't just put a Band-Aid on it and fund, supporting refugees. Yes, we need to do that, and we need to help find them jobs and homes and all those things, but we have to look at the root cause, and that's where the government comes into play. Mm-hmm. But also where funding can come to help understand, let's look at violence, gender-based violence, okay? This is a problem that could be solved if we brought all the right people together from all different sectors, because it is not just a women's issue, right? It
Mhm.
is, so I hope I'm making sense, but
Absolutely.
this is, I think we are finally seeing a cataclysmic change in how we approach solving problems, evidence-based, and people are realizing they need to form coalitions. I mean, just a couple weeks back, we saw that beautiful $40 million that was granted to 4 organizations. That was, Melinda French Gates, Mackenzie Scott, and 2 other incredible philanthropists. So we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're also going to see many more women stepping up because they are realizing the power that they can wield when they write checks.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we're also going to see, almost like a blurring of the lines between investing and philanthropy, right? Impact investing, there used to be like, well, philanthropy's here and investing's here. You know what? It's all good. And we need all of it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Susan. So I perfectly said from an expert communicator. No, that was really, really wonderful. And so I want to bridge that to your book, right? Because your book, which, is, I see it very much as like a study guide. I go in when I feel like I'm looking for solutions, or I'm trying to figure out how to really communicate in this new world or present differently on Zoom, just all of these different things. I feel like your book has so many insights for readers, and it really hits on this important, right, of creating a meaningful constellation of connections that is anchored in intentions, shared interest, and helping others, especially today. And I just, I'd love for you to connect the dots for us on how this is, linked to this crucial conversation that we're having around philanthropy and impact investing today.
Well, no pun intended, connect the dots. And an underlying theme of the book is this notion of constellations. And I often say, when in the days of antiquity, when people would look up at the sky, they would try to understand what they were seeing, and they created stories around the stars in the sky, and hence were born the constellations. And what I like to think is when we make connections, we are creating tapestries of stories. We are creating impact. Because if I look back at, my last 30 years of working professionally, when introductions have been made, things got done. Good things got done.
Yeah.
Nonprofits were launched and funded. Jobs were created and secured. These are the things that come from meaningfully connecting. Okay. And, just in answer to your question, I would, this is very simple, but I think and believe that we are more powerful together, pooling our business acumen, our resources, and opening our Rolodex to others. We don't own the people that are inside our, obviously people don't have Rolodexes anymore, but I did. But honestly, also knowing that most people want to be helpful and often don't know how. But they trust their colleagues and their friends. And if they are, if they attend a faith-based institution, their fellow parishioners. So let's tap into that to collectively make positive change. There is no better way to hope to bring people together than around a cause that people believe in. And that is a good part of what the book dives into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that term constellation, because I feel like it just perfectly described, my experience being out there trying to raise capital to build, water.org and then water equity. It was often this very unpredicted pathway of different connections that led to something new or being introduced to another person, where magic happened. I mean, I can't think of a better word. I've literally in board meetings said, here are all the things we need to make magic happen, because that's what it takes. Very rarely do you send a cold email, asking a foundation for funding and presenting who you are, and then immediately funding happens, right? There's a whole host of things that come together. And Susan, just to share this with you, one of the scenarios that I will never forget in terms of how, some critical grant funding came to WADA.org was when, there was an article about our work that was in Fast Company, magazine, written by our dear friend, Ellen McGirt, I know, who is also, right, her constellations are incredible. And, as the leader of a foundation was reading that article, I just happened to be on the phone with someone from that foundation, 2 days earlier, introducing our work. And all of those different conversations, along with 2 other people who validated our work, who, talked to that foundation, led to $8 million in funding, for WADA.org. So the constellation is a perfect, way to frame it. I also think that I love what you said, which is start with how can I help? And I think many times we lose that. We're always in transactional mode, or I got to be fast, I got to be efficient. And we lose that essence of what it is that makes us happy to work together. And I think women are slightly different in that effort. I mean, I'm excited to see how women will shift, and they already are shifting, the philanthropy and impact investing landscape, which gets me to that third big question for you. Are you ready? we have 5 minutes. I'm going to try to fit them both in. Quick. So, I don't want to bash capitalism, and we don't want to be extreme, but I think it is safe to say today that the way our capitalist society is working is on a highway to destruction. I mean, it continues to prioritize short-term profit above everything else. I mean, there's shifts happening. I would say it's not happening fast enough. But from your perspective, Susan, how do we get to, or what needs to happen to get to a place where our decisions are starting to be filtered through a new system that reflects our values, which is people, planet, and profit versus just profit? And not that profit is a value, but we need profit. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, I am always, wearing rose-colored glasses, so we have to take where, what you're hearing and where it's coming from. But I'm also a pragmatist. So, 10 steps forward, 2 steps back, 10 steps forward, 2 steps back. Mm-hmm. So I would say we are already seeing positive change in the sense of demand for companies to be purposeful and purpose-driven, but not just from consumers, which was kind of the overriding dialogue of the last, maybe before the last 3 years, where it was all, well, customers are going to buy from companies. Now it's employees want to work for companies that are making the right choices. Shareholders are wanting to invest in the companies making those. And we're talking big shareholders, like big mutual funds, institutional investors, and the communities where companies operate. And the pandemic has accelerated this change. So I firmly believe capitalism is and must become more empathetic, and it has been. If we look at how companies responded to the pandemic, have they done enough? No, by no stretch of the imagination. But as mentioned, 10 steps forward, 2 steps back. And people are realizing that purpose is not just a nice to have. Like, this is expected. Mm-hmm. Social impact isn't just good for the heart and for your conscience, it's essential to business. It's no longer just a nice to have. And then we look at ESG investing, which is actually by 2030 supposed to reach $1 trillion in investments. That means companies have to pay attention. Yeah. And a recent survey found that 88% of employees said that working for a company with a strong purpose is more important now than ever, even more important than the salary that they are receiving. And with the current job market tipped in the favor of workers, people will be demanding more from their employers. They'll be asking the difficult questions that you ask. How do you ensure people from underinvested communities have a seat at the table? How do you support working parents? What are you doing to reduce waste and move towards circularity? So these are questions that 5 years ago employees wouldn't be asking before they went. So I do see a seismic shift.
I love that, Susan, and that it's all of those things. It's good to hear it so that we're reminded that this change is happening. We may not feel like it's fast enough, but I love that description. 10 steps forward, 2 steps back, which gets me to our very last question. We've got 1 minute. What you're allowed to go over 1 minute. It's okay. So, what are 2 actionable next steps for our audience today here
Right.
that you would recommend to be part of this change?
Sure.
And I not to put words in your mouth, but I feel like one of them could be, as an employee, ask the hard questions.
Yep.
But over to you, Susan.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, building meaningful relationships is so important right now. It's not just good for you socially and physically, like, emotionally, but professionally. Connecting with others can be actually a radical act that leads to radical change, which we desperately need. So, take a deep look at your network and ask to be introduced to people who might not come in contact with you on a normal basis. Whom
Right.
do you admire? Who's doing the work, whether it's through friends, events, or networking groups? And I realize we're still stuck in this, online vortex, but we can be doing this virtually.
Yeah.
We all have the ways to build relationships with diverse driven people who have the capacity to do more together. That's one. 2, make an effort to not only support purpose-driven organizations, but demand more from them. Speak up. Companies have become increasingly involved in social issues, as we have been discussing, but we need that momentum to continue. We are facing multiple, if not more, international challenges right now: climate change, the pandemic, gender inequity, racial inequity, and many others. They may seem insurmountable sometimes, but they can be addressed with a multi-sectoral approach and effort from nonprofits, companies, government agencies, and grassroots movements. But it all begins, and this is going to sound tonky, but it all begins with you.
Oh, but I love that, Susan. A great way to end the conversation today. Such a wealth of insight and knowledge. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today. There will be a season 2 with a co-host whom who's a dear friend. Hint, hint, Ellen McGirt. We will definitely be having you on season 2. So this is just setting the tone, for so many of the other conversations that we'll have. But this was wonderful today, Susan. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.